The card trick block is a simple, easy block that's made with half square triangles and quarter square triangles. Let me show you how. Hi, I'm Roberta from Quilt Crafters Corner. Today's block is called Card Trick. Now this is done with half square triangles and quarter square triangles. This is a pattern from quilterscash.com and it's free for you to print and use. Now she calls for 2 colors in this block and I've done it in the 2 color way. I have seen it done in 4 colors though. That's quite stunning. So let's take a look at the card trick block in the 2 color variation. So here's our block here, and as you can see, we've got two colors in it, and it's got a background. So let's take a look at how this block goes together. And it's an easy block because it doesn't require much fabric. I have 3 colors here. This is 5 1/4 by 15 1/4. So the first thing I need to do is I need to cut one of each color that's 5 1/4. Okay, so here are my 3. There's my background, there's my yellow, and there's my purple. So now I have this left. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut each one at 5. So I'm just going to be trimming off this little extra piece up here. And then this one is going to be the same. I'm going to cut it at 5 by 5. Okay, so there's my blocks that I'm going to use to start this. So I like to put them together so that they're all right. I have my 5-inch blocks here, and what I need to do is I need to take 2 and put these together. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut this in half on the diagonal. Okay, and these are going to be this square here, this square here, this square here, and this square here. So we'll put those aside for right now. All right, so next we're going to take our 5 1/4 squares and we're going to cut them. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut these in half from point to point. And now I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to cut these again. And I'm going to cut them in the middle here. And when you go to do this, make sure that you line your edges up with your 45-degree angle and center your point at the top up here. And you're just going to cut these into quarters. So now we have 2 of those, 2 of these, 2, and now 2 more. 2 more yellow, and 2 more of the white. So everything is kind of placed, I put them all together so that they're all, so you know where they are. Okay, let's take our extra squares. Now these are 5-inch squares. And I cut them a little bigger because I know I'm going to sew these into half square triangles and I want to make sure that I have enough to trim up. So good size together, faces together. And now once again we're going to draw a line with my air erase pen from point to point. There's one, and there's two. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this to the machine. I'm going to sew a scant 1/4 inch off of the line I just drew this way and this way. And this will make 2 yellows and 2 purples. Okay, so here are my 2 5-inch squares, and I've sewn a scant 1/4 inch off my center line on both sides, and I've taken it to the iron and I've set my seams. I want to make sure I press these seams really good. Now all I need to do is I need to cut these in half. Now, what I want to do is take this to the iron and I want to press. And I always want to press to the dark fabric, the darker fabric. When you press to the lighter fabric, sometimes you can see the shadow of the seam. So you always want to press to the darker fabric whenever you can. Sometimes you just can't help it, but in this case, just press to the darker fabric. So I will take these all over to the iron and I will press these. Okay, so I have pressed my half square triangles. I have pressed my half square triangles to the darker fabric. Now I need to trim them up. And since I cut these just a little bigger, I've got something to trim off. And I always like to cut them bigger. That way you know you can square it up to the diagonal line, to the diagonal seam. Now this is really good because you also cut off these little dog ears or these little tabs, whatever you want to call them. And you're trimming those off also, so that just makes for a nicer seam when you go to put these together. Now because this is a 3 by 3 square, I know that these are 4.5. This is a 12-inch finished in a quilt. It's 12.5 as you see it here. Okay, so those are my 4 corners. Now let's work on these squares here. Now, as you can see, in order for the fabric to make this almost heart shape, we need to take our 1/4 square triangles with our half square triangle. So we're going to need to make sure that we get these put together correctly and placed correctly so that you don't have them mixed up or in the wrong place. Okay, so 2 of these are going to be with 2 whites and 2 of these are going to be with the other 2. And these are for our center square. And all I'm doing right now is I'm putting my good sides together. And sometimes it's kind of tough when you have a white on white, like one of these is. So, okay, now I'm going to take these to the machine, and I need to make sure that I sew them in the correct way. If I sew them here, I'll get that pattern. If I sew them here, I get a different one. And that might not work for this. So pay attention how you sew these together. make sure that you sew them in the correct way. And I want to sew them on this side here in order for that white to come out there. So I will take these all over to the machine and I will sew them together. And I'm sewing a scant 1/4 inch right here along this side. Okay, so here are my triangles. Now this is a good time to mention that these are 1/4 square triangles and they are bias cut here and here. So I highly recommend use starch on these to keep them from distorting and making, giving you wavy shapes. So I've starched these when I've originally cut them, and then I starched them again lightly now just when I pressed them. And they also lay much flatter when you do that. Okay, so now what we need to do is I need to take my 2 yellow ones and I'm going to place them right here on top of these. And I'm going to take the purple ones and they're going to go on top of these. And now I'm going to sew a scant 1/4 inch on the longest side here. But what I want to do is I want to flip it over and go and sew from the back side. From this side where you have the seam. That way you know that you're going to get that seam to lay flat. So just sew from this side and then you'll be able to keep an eye on the seam. Okay, so here are my blocks. They're finished. Now I need to trim these. And once again, I'm going to trim them to 4.5 inches because that's what they need to be. And this gives me the opportunity to make sure that everything's square. Plus I'm also cutting off all these little tabs or dog ears or whatever you want to call them. And then that way I know I will get a nice, neat seam. And I won't have all this extra bulk of material in there. Okay, now we just need to make our center square. And this is just like this. So there are my 4 pieces. So I'll need to attach these 2 together and these 2 together. So what I'll do is I'll take this to the machine and I'll sew a scant 1/4 inch along here and here. Okay, so here are my 2 pieces, and what I'll do now is I will sew them together. And when I press this, I press to the darker fabric so that I know my seams are going to nest really carefully and really nicely right there in the center. See how those nest right together? And I get a nice point and sharp centers. Okay, so I've sewn this together, and I want to just open this seam up to what I just sewed and just kind of open that up. And then what I'm going to do is when I take it to the iron to press it, I'm just going to press this open so that I get a nice little almost pinwheel there in the center, and that will lay much flatter. Okay, now I need to trim this up to 4.5 also, and I'll take my diagonal, my 45-degree diagonal, and just trim this up so that I have a nice square block. And this also cuts off all those little dog ear tabs. Okay, and there's my center block. So what I'll do now is I'll start sewing these together into rows. Okay, I've attached my top row and my middle row, and now I just need to attach my bottom row. And the important part is to make sure that this point and this point match. And the same on this side. We need to make sure that this point matches. So I will set a pin through the seam here and into that point on the other side. And that way I can make sure that I get my points matched up. So that one's in, and then I will put one here on this one also and just get them to match up so that when I go to sew this, I don't lose those points. Okay. And there's our second block. As you can see, this is a lovely pattern the way it is, but it's especially nice in 4 different colors where each one of these is a separate color. So 4 different colors to do that. The only thing you need to do is you need to stay focused on where those half square triangles and quarter square triangles are going in order to get them in the right place. If you like this video and you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Ring the notification bell, and that will tell you when I've released a new video. I also have a group on Facebook that's a private group. It's called Quilter Swarm, and if you'd like to hang out with some like-minded quilters, come join us over at Quilter Swarm. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.